Hey everybody, good Wednesday afternoon. Welcome back. This is day 3 in a series of 5 live streaming trainings, mini trainings that I'm doing based on my book. Where is it? Here it is. The 5 Forgotten Fundamentals of Prospecting. There are 5 forgotten fundamentals. There are 5 days in a week. Hey, this works, right? So today we're going to be talking about tension. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss because tension is one of those words that gives you kind of a feeling to it, right? Like tension, that sounds like discomfort. Jeff, look, we're not old school salespeople. We are not people who are trying to put people in pain. We're not trying to make them uncomfortable. We're not trying to make them squirm. We're not trying to make them feel so bad that they're willing to buy something just so they don't have to talk to us anymore. Well, of course not. But I don't want you to think about tension as discomfort. I want you to think about tension as just stimulus. I want you to think about tension as a reason for people to act, for people to move, for people to get off their position where they are right now and get to someplace better. Tension is a stimulus to act. And you know what? People don't just buy stuff because they're in pain. Sometimes they buy stuff. Sometimes they buy really expensive stuff because they want to do something different, because they want to get someplace that they aren't right now, even though where they are isn't that bad. Who buys a Rolex watch because they're in pain? If the pain point is because they are in a place where they just don't know what time it is, then one, why doesn't their phone work, right, for keeping time? And two, they can buy hundreds of watches that tell time, at least for a little bit, for the price of one Rolex watch. But the thing is, there's a feeling that comes along with wearing a really fancy watch. There's a feeling of having earned something. There's a feeling of having gotten to a place where you could afford a piece like that, or gotten to a place where maybe someone gave it to you. Those are things that have feelings associated with them that aren't really associated with pain, but are really rewards for having done great work. You feel accomplished, not as if you're just relieved, right? So think about the difference between feeling like you've accomplished something or feeling relieved that you don't have to deal with something anymore. Now, there's an interesting concept here as it relates to tension, and I give full credit to my partner on the Why and the Buy podcast, Christy Walters. When we were talking about this concept initially a couple of years ago, she said, Jeff, the thing about tension is that you can't create any tension unless there is first a connection. And, if you think about, and I guess I could have prepared a little better and gotten a rubber band and pulled that out for the camera here, but imagine a rubber band held between your two hands. And imagine you pull on that rubber band from either side, and the further you pull on that rubber band, the more tension is created, right? So when that tension is created, right, there's a stimulus, there's potential energy in that tension. Cut that rubber band and see what happens. Both ends fall limp in the middle. You're holding two disconnected ends. There is no longer any tension between your two hands with that rubber band. So unless there is connection, there can be no tension. So Christy said, how are you going to create that tension, right? And so how are you going to connect? So when you're thinking about these, you're thinking about your prospects, you're thinking about these fundamentals that we're talking about here, how are you going to first connect with your prospect? You know that you can't just show up, throw up, and dump all this product information on them and figure that, because they're just in the right place at the right time, that they're going to see something you offered and they're going to want to go and buy it, right? There's no tension in that. There's luck in that. If anything, there's serendipity in that. There's no skill involved in that. Being in the right place at the right time. Look, there's a lot to be said about that, and you want to try to put yourself in the right place at the right time, but getting lucky is not the same as being skilled and actually going through the steps of the sales process. So how are you going to connect with somebody? How are you going to get their attention? How are you going to earn the right to have that attention, to keep that attention? How are you going to justify the fact that you're someone worth talking to with something worth talking about, so that you can get to the point where you can actually communicate your value, right? So how are you going to get their attention with so much going on? How are you going to cut through all the noise out there as it relates to reaching your prospect. Right? So you've got to find a way to connect. And I believe you find that way to connect by becoming someone worth talking to, because you have a lot of things worth talking about. But you can have those bases covered and still not be able to reach them and be the signal in all the noise. It used to be, and when I started this business, the prevailing thought was that, look, if you put a blog out there every week, shot a couple of YouTube videos, and you put really quality content out there on the internet for people to find, then people would find it, they would tell their friends, and you'd have an audience. Well, we don't see that happening so much anymore. Sure, it does a little bit. But now what you have are people out there on LinkedIn every single day posting something and commenting and sharing and doing all those things. And then people on Twitter doing the same thing. People on Instagram doing the same thing. All over the place, no matter where you look, everybody is turning up the volume of their collective content and the levels at which they're shouting about it. So as the noise level rises, we've got stadiums full of people speaking louder and louder. As the noise level rises, then it's harder to stand out. It feels like everybody's got a megaphone, but everybody's also wearing noise-canceling headphones. Like, you've got to do something to reach out and connect, and you've got to be relevant to the people you're trying to reach, and you need to be in front of them where they are. So how are you going to cut through the noise? Are you going to find a mutual connection and ask for an introduction? Are you going to find out where these people hang out online or even in person and find a good reason to be there, find a good reason to be introduced or to bump into them? Are you going to really reach out and proactively call them, email them, get them via traditional mail? Are you going to do something that makes you separate yourself from everybody else? You have to think very critically about this. You cannot apply a one-size-fits-all solution, because when you try to please everybody, you end up thrilling nobody. So I want you to think about where that's all coming from. I want you to think about how you're going to accomplish those things. The last question I have from you today is, what questions are you going to ask? So look, we know that you create tension by asking questions. You create you create this tension, you create this context by the questions you ask and by the discovery sessions that you conduct. So what kind of questions are you going to ask to get that initial conversation started? What kind of questions are you going to ask in the discovery session itself? And what kind of questions are you going to ask to move the process forward? Now, I think a very simple way to start with your initial prospecting questions, and yes, you can ask questions in initial prospecting. Sometimes the best way to demonstrate that you've got something worth talking about is by asking a very provocative question and then waiting for an answer. And sometimes you don't get that answer for a couple of days. You need to go back and make another call, send another email with another question. But the very basic kind of framework that I use for asking questions is, if I've got 3 things that differentiate me, and I've got 3 questions that I can ask, to start that conversation, then all of a sudden I've got, 3 questions that I can ask about each of 3 differentiators. That's 9 questions. I can ask those questions every other day for the next 3 weeks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I've got 9 touch points over 3 weeks that will help establish that I am not going away, I cannot be waited out, and I am someone worth talking to with something worth talking about. As I think about the way that I'm differentiated, one of the ways is that I'm not someone who just studied selling and came out here and is talking to people about this. I'm someone who spent over a decade in the trenches. I have learned from the school of hard knocks. I have learned from my successes, and I've learned a lot of things in between. I've also studied why things work. So one of my questions could be, do you have a leader who has been in your situation before, who's been in the situation of your reps before, and knows how to help them get unstuck from where they are? Do you have someone on your team in your company who can not just explain what your sales reps should be doing, but you can help them understand why what they're doing is working? Do you have someone on your team who you can help a sales rep on the front lines understand not just how to do it like everybody else? Because look, you and I both know that I can't sell like you and you can't sell like me. But when you understand what really works and why, you can help each one of your reps determine how they can sell in a way that's most fulfilling and successful for them. Those are questions that I could write on a postcard and send in the mail. Those are questions that I could send in an email, in a text, in a direct message on social media. I can leave those in a voicemail. I can do all of those things. I can do a combination of all of those things. And I can do that in a very focused campaign of maybe 15 to 20 touches over 4 to 6 weeks, like what a lot of the sales intelligence is suggesting out there. And that becomes a campaign, that becomes a cadence that is worth pursuing and executing on. And tell me that if you have a kind of focus, if you have the kind of specificity with your audience, and you know that you're asking questions that will get them to think differently, even if they haven't taken the time or been able to respond just yet, you mean to tell me that you aren't planting the seeds of a relationship that could be started later down the road? You aren't already putting some concepts in their mind to where when they finally get around to thinking about that and acting on that they aren't going to think of you? If you're selling that way, and a lot of people aren't, how are you not going to separate yourself from the rest? How are you not going to become the signal among all the noise? Think about that. Think about what you're doing with your prospecting. Think about whether or not you're really effective with the way you're approaching it right now. Are you just dialing for dollars every day? Are you asking bland, generic questions? Or are you focusing on things that are going to be relevant to your prospects? The more relevant you can be, the more focused and targeted you can be with your outreach, and the more consistent you can be, the better off you're going to do. So I just want you to think about this concept of tension. I want you to think about this concept of helping someone get to where they wish they could be, but they just aren't there yet. And I want you to think about how you can be a little bit more tactical and a little more thoughtful with your approach so that you can appear more relevant and you can make the impression that you are, in fact, someone worth talking to and you have a lot of things worth talking about. They may want to give you a call back.